If you enjoy today's content, then please consider supporting Top Hat Gaming Man on Patreon. Yeah! Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. A couple of months ago on this channel, I released a video on forgotten Castlevania games that were released across various different home computers. This video was very popular and reached a rather large audience for this humble little channel. So, bearing this in mind, I thought today I would simply give the people what they want by delivering even bloody more Castlevania related content. I have gone to great lengths in the past producing Castlevania videos, including even shooting at Bran Castle itself over in Transylvania, the very building that inspired the architecture found in the game. Today we are going to be looking at the unreleased Castlevania game, which was set for release on the Sega Dreamcast platform. According to my sources, this game, known as Castlevania Resurrection, was at one point in history supposed to be a launch title for the Sega system over in America. The game was not unfortunately developed in time though, so the release date was shifted to March of the year 2000 instead. As we all know, this was not to be either, and the game was quietly cancelled for a release altogether. The cutscene footage I am showing you now is sadly the only video of anything of this game available online, as the game to this day has sadly still never been leaked to the information superhighway. According to that little place, known as the internet, rumours are flying about prior to the cancellation of the game that things were not particularly going too great and the game was essentially stuck in development hell. This game was set to be the third 3D Castlevania game to see a release after the two extremely lackluster entries on the Nintendo 64. Both of those titles were critically panned by both journalists and gamers alike, so if this game was turning out even worse than either of those, it is no wonder that Konami decided to pull the plug on this entry. While speculation has always been rife regarding the game's overall quality, the game's art director Greg Aldian states that Resurrection was canned simply due to the news that Sony gave about the future release of the PlayStation 2, so pulled Castlevania support away from the platform. So, there you have it ladies and gentlemen, two possible reasons as to why we never got to see this game. If I was to take a stab at what happened with regards to this situation, I personally would infer that it was probably a combination of both of these things, which led to this game's demise. So, now we have got the sad cancellation part of this story out of the way, let's start talking a little bit more about this game itself. The game is set in the demonic year of 1666, most likely due to the fact that 666 is the number of the beast, although it is also of note that 1666 was also the year which London became a fiery hell, as 80,000 homes caught alight during the Great Fire of London. When you think about it, it is a rather amusing coincidence that all this fire occurred in the year with 666 in it. All in all though, making 1666 a particularly frightful year, and the perfect time period to set a Castlevania game in. Anyway, apart from London becoming a crispy duck, yum, apparently this was also a year a dark countess created a portal to assist Dracula re-entering the living world. Dracula and the Countess, also known as Lady Dracula according to some of the game's art, joined forces in an attempt to take over the world and rid us of those pesky meddling Belmont kids for good. This plan, like the game itself, all goes a bit tits up. Lady Dracula and her portal, or wizard sleeve as I like to call it, may have led the world into darkness and turmoil in the mortal realm. However, these rifts also allowed the forces of light to summon two Belmonts from different time zones to come and combat this evil. In this case, a Belmont from the past and a Belmont from the future. We will talk about these characters very shortly, but first, let's talk about what we know about the gameplay. The Dreamcast Castlevania game was set to be another 3D incarnation in the series. However, mechanically, it was set to differ from the Nintendo 64 games that had come before it. Resurrection was allegedly set to be focused around exploring, platforming, and was intended to be a fully action-orientated title. The goal was to create a game much like Rondo of Blood, but imagined into a 3D environment. Sources say the game was going to include 4 or 5 stages, which were all going to be quite long in length. The game was also set to see a brand new control, camera and aiming system introduced, in an effort to rectify some of the issues which could be found in the Nintendo 64 games. It is said that a playable version of this game was shown to the press, so it is interesting to note that there are likely ROMs of this game out there somewhere in the world. Even if they are locked away at Konami's headquarters, we can at least confirm they probably still exist. Despite a lack of the game itself, the music for this title was later released by the developers, which we can hear playing throughout this video, so that is something, I guess. Now let's look at what we know about the characters from this title. We will start by quickly talking about the Belmont from the future, known as Victor Belmont. According to this title's lore, Victor of the 1800s was never a vampire hunter, but chose to live as a wandering gambler instead. However, no pun intended, the Guardian of Light forced Victor's hand into going into the past to prove himself worthy of the Belmont legacy. Although Castlevania Resurrection was completely canned, it is interesting and of note that a character named Victor Belmont would go on to feature in a future Castlevania title. Victor Belmont would appear in Lord of Shadows 2 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. In this game, he would feature as a descendant of Gabriel Belmont and claims himself to be the last person in the whole Belmont line. The playable character from the past was set to be Sonya Belmont, who has an even more interesting history than that of Victor. Sonya made her first appearance in the Castlevania series within Castlevania Legends for the Game Boy. This was the third Game Boy Castlevania game, and by far the weakest of the 3 in the series. Whilst the game itself is nothing to praise, the story of Sonya is an interesting and controversial one. Sonya is notable for being the first ever female Belmont protagonist within a Castlevania game. The story of Castlevania Legends takes place back in the year 1450, over 200 years prior to Resurrection. She was presented as the first member of the Belmont clan, thus making every other Belmont her descendants. So, overall, one of the main story arcs of the game was going to be the founding member of the Belmont clan, Sonya, teaching the final Belmont, Victor, in the ways of vampire hunting. Now we have established who these characters are, this is where things become more contrived and ridiculous. Castlevania Legends, starring Sonya Belmont, was intended to be the Castlevania origin story, effectively making it the prequel to every Castlevania game ever made. Back in 1997, a Castlevania official timeline was revealed in Konami's magazine, which was apparently supposed to act as a reference point for the developers of Symphony of the Night, when it came to creating a story which fit in line with the rest of the series. With regards to Castlevania Legends, the game was quickly removed from this official timeline during the game's development cycle, and this point got made very clear in the next publication of the Konami magazine, who introduced the timeline. The man responsible for reducing Legends to the same status as the likes of the Zelda CDI games was Koji Igarashi, the creator of this timeline, who was best known for his work on Symphony of the Night and the overall change in direction for the series. One common conspiracy theory regarding the game's removal from canon, which continues to get the social justice mob screeching, is that Igarashi simply hated the idea of the original Belmont being a woman. However, upon inspecting this further, this theory appears to be poppycock at best. The real reason regarding Legends' removal from the canon seems to fall more in line with the game's storyline itself. Like most Castlevania games, Legends simply ends with a Belmont slaying Dracula. However, it is what comes before that which throws the entire Castlevania story into disarray. Throughout the game's story, Sonya befriends son of Dracula Alucard, and the two quickly form what you would call a bond. The game closes with a scene showing that Sonya gave birth to a child that resulted from her past relationships with Alucard, and who would carry on the fate and the tragedy of the Belmont clan, along with the bloodline of dark ways. All in all, concluding that every Belmont from there on after were Dracula's direct descendants, reducing Simon Belmont and co to nothing more than Tesco value Luke Skywalkers. So, as you can now see, it is not likely that Legends was removed from the canon for featuring a woman, nor is it likely that Resurrection was cancelled altogether for the same reason. In reality, some games and stories are just simply bad, and in some cases they are just best left forgotten, whether they feature female leads or not. I would guess some fans of other franchises would probably be very happy if some of the terrible entries were removed from existence of their favourite franchises. Who knows, maybe one day, future directors of some of these intellectual properties in which I'm showing now will show the same balls Koji Igarashi once did, rendering tripe like 2016 Ghostbusters and The Last Jedi to nothing more than earning their rightful positions as terrible, politically motivated fan fictions. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the bizarre story of Castlevania Resurrection. A story we had to make sense of by looking into the Castlevania timeline and at Castlevania Legends for the Game Boy. The Castlevania game, which despite being released, technically never happened. I have really enjoyed creating Castlevania content, and later this year I may even move to Transylvania for a while to create some of the deepest Castlevania videos ever made, linking many real life locations directly back to the series. But over the next 6 months I have a little bit more work to do on this channel before we can get to that stage. Anyway, I regularly create weekly in-depth content on this channel, covering subjects such as cancelled forgotten games consoles, way through to deep retrospectives on systems that need a little more coverage, such as the Brazilian Zeebo for example. So, if you like this content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for regular videos straight to your phone. Which elements of the Castlevania series would you like to see me cover on this channel next? Finally, my channel Top Hat Gaming Man is partly funded from the fantastic support and donations I receive from my top-notch Patreon supporters. So shout-outs in the credits to Carl Johnson, Suzuka Kobayashi, Greg Hooper, Richard Clark, Harold Webb, Since Spaces, Kevin Verhaley, David Mountford, Andrew Bazansky, Edward O'Reilly, Tom Elliott, Mark S. Hines, Lawrence C, The Gaming Muso, SpongeMat B, Quang DX, Stuart McDermott, Nash Quad, Michael Baker, Andy Aldridge, and all of my other patrons. You are making my dreams get closer by the week. We'll be there one day. Thank you.